So yeah, can you tell me a quick summary of French Revolution?
French Revolution, Louis XVI became king of France in 1714 and 1774. Then he was married to Marie Antoinette. He
Hmm.
became king of France at 20 years old. Then
Correct.
then he increased taxes because of
Hmm.
he increased taxes as he had empty treasury. He couldn't run the country.
Hmm.
So to he didn't had the country didn't had money for anything, so it had to increase taxes.
Hmm.
Yeah. Then after that, three types of people were there: nobility, clergy, and peasants.
Hmm.
So clergy were the first estate. The clergy people, the church made a law called TTs, taking produce from peasants.
Hmm.
Then, then third estate had to pay a tax called as taille, which had to be directly paid to state. And then second estate and first estate had privileges from not paying taxes. And
Correct.
second estate were what we say the businessmen and all that.
Correct. Yeah, right. So also tell me what is the feudal system?
Feudal system is old regime.
Correct. So the old regime is France before 1789. So the
Yes, yes.
feudal system tells us about the three different states that were there in the France before 1789. So this tells us about the old regime and feudal system of France. Okay. Yeah. So when was the storming of Bastille happened, and when did storming of Bastille take place?
In 1789.
Correct. But even the date is important, okay, because it is a significant event. So 14 July 1789. I want you to write it down. Okay, important point. Storming of Bastille 14 July 1789. And what was the significance of Bastille?
Significance was that it is to dominate the power of king, showing the
Yeah,
dominating power
it
of
showed the
king.
despotic power of the king.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
despotic power is a key word. Okay, so you have to read that.
then
Despotic power of the king.
it was hated by all people.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, despotic power of the king, very important. Yeah, you can make note of this one as well. Yeah, done.
Yeah, done.
Yeah, okay. So the fortress was demolished and its stone fragments were sold in market to all those who wish to keep it as a souvenir of its destruction. Okay. So people after destroying it were, were joyed because they had overthrown the despotic power of the king. Okay, that was their feeling. Okay, so Tithi is a tax. Tithi is a tax which was extracted by the clergy people, and also it included a direct tax which is called as tally. So Tithi and tallies were two taxes which were being borne by the peasants of the third estate, and it was being taken by the clergy. Okay, clergy in the sense the church. And a number of indirect taxes which were levied on articles on every day, like consumption of salt or tobacco. The burden of financing activities of the state through taxes was borne by the third estate alone. Okay, so that was the drawback which enraged the third estate. So then the struggle to survive. Yeah, can you explain this? What happens in struggle to survive?
Then In the struggle to survive, population of France increased from 23 million in 1715 to 28 million in 1709. So because of all this, because of increase of population, inflation increased. Then
Correct.
because of that, substances crisis occurred.
Correct. So subsistence crisis is an important point over here. So what led to subsistence crisis? Because the harvest and produce was not good, and it was not sufficient, and it was brought about by drought and hail. So subsistence crisis is an extreme situation when the basic means of livelihood are endangered. Yeah, so subsistence crisis was something which frequently occurred in old regime. So old regime in the sense France before 1789. So it was very frequent in old regime.
Okay,
Yeah. So a growing middle class envisages an end to privileges. So the middle class was growing. Yeah, can you explain this?
so in this, there were three people. What to say? John Locke, Rossio, and Montesquieu. They made
Hmm.
three books. One was two treatises of government
Hmm.
by John Locke. Then one more book is there, Social Contract by Montesquieu and
Correct.
Soc- and Spirit of no Social Contract by Rossio and Montesquieu made a what to say Spirit of Laws.
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. So all these were, the result of revolutionaries and formation of groups in French Revolution. During before the French Revolution. So many
Oh,
people took part in forming groups, forming a political party, forming parties who wanted to bring about a revolution in France. So this model of a constitution was put into force in the USA. Why USA? Do you know?
that because USA that was
Because
it gained
France,
independence, the
correct.
colonies.
USA had recently gained independence because France had helped 13 American colonies to gain independence from the Britain. So, since USA had recently gained independence, they thought that this model of government, which was the constitutional government, should be put into practice there. And the American Constitution and its guarantee of individual right was an important example for political thinkers in France. So, since France was also in a debt and it was under the harsh monarchy of Louis XVI, they wanted to bring about a constitutional government in France. Yeah, these ideas of philosophers were discussed intensively in salons and coffee houses and spread among people through books and newspapers. These were frequently read aloud in groups for the benefit of those who could not read and write. The news that Louis XVI planned to impose further taxes to be able to meet the expenses of state generated anger and protest against the system of privileges. So it was planned that Louis XVI was planning that, to impose furthermore taxes, but these were something which were protested and enriched the people. Yeah, the outbreak of revolution. So what do you understand with this paragraph?
In this, in outbreak of revolution, there were in 5th May 1789, Louis XVI called out assembly to make proposal for new taxes, and then after that, and then there were first and second estate who sent 300 representatives. First and second estate, then third estate sent 600 representatives. However, the first and second estate were sitting at front rows, facing each other on both sides, whereas third estate was standing back. Then after that,
Correct.
uh, then after
Yeah,
that,
and their grievances were written down
no,
in
no,
40,000 letters
before
which the
that,
representatives had brought.
what is it? The women and peasants were not allowed to vote. So because of So because of that, because the third estate demanded voting from king, the king rejected. After that, all then after that they protested and the letters
Correct.
had to be sent.
Correct. So the third estate was not satisfied with the king's decision, hence they walked out of the assembly and they saw themselves as the spokesman for the French nation, and they swore that they would not disperse until they had drafted a constitution for the France, and they declared themselves as the National Assembly. Yeah, declared themselves as National Assembly and swore not to disperse till they had drafted a constitution for France that would limit the powers of the monarch. They were led by Mirabeau and Abbassias. Okay, Mirabeau and Abbassias are two important personalities which we read in this chapter. So Mirabeau was born in a noble family, but he was convinced of the need to do away with the with the society of feudal privilege. So he thought that first and second estate should not exist, and all the taxes must be borne by everyone, and everyone should have an equal participation in the building of a nation. So he bought out a journal and delivered powerful speeches to the crowd assembled at Versailles. So Versailles is a place in France, and they assembled in the indoor tennis court in the grounds of Versailles. Okay, so Versailles is a place in France. So they assembled at the indoor tennis court. Yeah, and Abbasius, who is originally a priest, wrote an influential pamphlet called "What is the Third Estate?" Yeah. While the National Assembly was busy at Versailles drafting a constitution, the rest of France seethed with turmoil. So, turmoil in the sense, again, a subsistence crisis. A severe winter had meant bad harvest. The price of bread rose. Often, bakers exploited the situation and hoarded supplies. Hoarded supplies in the sense they made a stock of it and did not sell it to the crowd. So, they were stocking supplies. After spending hours in long queues at the bakery, crowds of angry women stormed into the shops. At the same time, the king ordered troops to move into Paris. On 14 July, the agitated crowd stormed and destroyed the basilica. So yeah, we get to know that why was the basilica stormed? Because the condition was not good. National Assembly was drafting the constitution and people were facing turmoil. And at the same time, the king ordered troops to move into Paris, and the agitated crowd stormed and destroyed the basilica fort. Yeah.
In the countryside, rumors spread from village to village that the what we say lords of manor had sent a gang of thieves to
Hmm.
destroy the crops of farmers.
Hmm.
Then after that, farmers protested and they burnt all the documents of the manors.
Correct.
And after that, on 4th August 1789, the feudal system was abolished, so no more old regime, and
Correct.
the society and institutions which were created before on that times means before this all occurred. Whatever was created, all that got destroyed, and members of clergy were what we say they had to give up on their privileges. They also had to pay tax now, and and
Yeah.
then the TTs were abolished, and
Hmm.
the lands which were owned by churches because of taking money from peasants, that was also taken away. Then
Hmm.
government got assets for 2 billion leverage.
Yeah, so that was almost equivalent to their debt. So they were in a debt of 2 billion livers, and when they confiscated all this, they again got back 2 billion livers. So we can get to know that how, you know, horrible was the situation in France. They had the money, but they were unable to repay the loan. But the money was stuck in the first and second estate. So yeah, again, 4th August 1789, a very important day, a very important event. I want you to write it down. So it was the night when feudal system was abolished and the obligations and taxes were removed. So a decree was passed to abolish the
Oh,
feudal system of obligations and taxes.
okay.
Yeah, so France becomes a
Today
Constitutional
we had
monarchy.
revision social.
Okay. So which
Yes,
chapter?
we had first the two chapters of geography and civics.
Okay, that's easy.
Physical features was hard.
Hmm.
Yeah, that I
Yeah.
don't know.
So what happened? Can you see here? In 1789, National Assembly abolished. Okay, so they abolished the feudal system, but
Yeah,
it still took them 2 more years to make the constitution. So in 1971, National Assembly
1791.
completed. Yeah, 1791, the National Assembly completed drafting the constitution for France. Okay, its main objective was to limit the powers of the monarch. The power, instead of being concentrated in the hands of one person, were now separated and assigned to different institutions: the legislature, executive, and judiciary. Okay, this made of France a constitutional monarchy. Okay, so this was the system that they had. Okay, so judiciary, executive, legislature. So legislature had a national assembly. Okay, national assembly of 745 members. Electors voted to the national assembly. National assembly took care of the king. So the powers were not concentrated now. Okay, so the control was also in the minister and to the king, but it was monitored by the National Assembly. So France became a constitutional monarchy in 1791. Okay,
Okay.
yeah, so write it down. France becomes a constitutional monarchy in 1791. Important. Okay, Maximilien Robespierre is an important topic of this French Revolution chapter.
More than all of this.
No, it's equally important. Everything is equally important, but yeah, Maximilian Robespierre was normally asked.
Done that.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, this what does this paragraph tell us? That the right to vote was not given to
They told
everyone.
about
Okay, so
passive and active
correct.
citizens.
Yeah, passive and active citizens. So passive citizens were basically people who were younger than 25 years old and all the
No,
women. So women
above
did
20.
not have, yeah,
Not younger.
people younger than 25 years old, right? They were not eligible to vote.
No, it's written
And all the
above
women,
25 years.
people below 25 years were not
Ah,
eligible to vote. So only men above 25 years were eligible to vote.
yeah,
The same as saying like this, right? Yeah, so the
yeah.
men and all women were classed as passive citizens, the remaining men. So only men above 25 years old who paid taxes equal to 3 days of a laborer's wage were given the status of active citizens. And to become a member of the assembly, a man had to belong to the highest bracket of taxpayers. Okay, to qualify as an elector and then as a member of the assembly, a man had to belong to the highest bracket of taxpayers. So women were also not given the right to vote at that time. So it is again, it comes under the women's suffragette movement, right, which was led in France as well.
Yes.
France as well as Russia. So women's suffragette movement was a movement when women wanted to vote. Okay, they went through some revolutions and women parties were formed so as to attain the right to vote.
Oh,
Yeah. So the constitution began with a declaration of the rights of man and citizen. So constitution began with declaration of the rights such as right to life, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before law were established as natural and inalienable. That is, they belong to each human being by birth and could not be taken away. It was the duty of the state to protect each citizen's natural right. Okay, so it was the duty of the state. So yeah, reading political symbols. Okay, so broken chain stands for the act of becoming free. Chain is being broken, so it means that you are setting free, liberty. So the broken chain resembles freedom. Okay, act of becoming free. The bundle of rods or faces. One rod can easily be broken, but not an entire bundle. Strength lies in unity. Yeah, so this shows that strength lies in unity. The eye within a triangle radiating light. The all seeing eye stands for knowledge. The rays of the sun will drive away the cloud of ignorance. Scepter. So a scepter is a royal symbol of royal power, and then a snake biting its own tail to form a ring. So it shows the symbol of eternity. A ring has neither a beginning nor an end. So it is a snake biting its own tail, it's forming an infinite loop which has no beginning or end. Yeah, then we have the red Phrygian cap. It's a cap worn by a slave upon becoming free. And blue, white, red are the national colors of France. The winged woman, it's a personification of the law. So this woman was personized as law, and then the law tablet. The law is same for all, and all are equal before it. So this is what is the
Huh.
meaning of this image. And then we have France abolishes monarchy and becomes a republic. So as we can see, France became a constitutional monarchy after all the struggle of storming of Bastille and all that in 1791. France becomes a monarch constitutional monarchy, right? So it was like the king is being monitored for the charges that he's putting, for the taxes that he's putting and all that. But we see that France abolishes monarchy totally and becomes a republic. Yeah, so you can read this. Important, very important.
The situation in France continued to be tense during following years. Although Louis XVI had signed constitution, he entered into secret negotiations with the King of Prussia. Rulers of other France, rulers of other neighboring countries who were worried by the developments in France and made plans to send troops to put down events that had been taken place there since summer of 1789. Before this could happen, the National Assembly voted in April 1792 to declare war against Prussia and Austria. Thousands of volunteers thronged from the provinces to join the army. They saw this as a war of the people against king and aristocracies all over Europe. Among the patriotic songs, they sang the Marseillaise, composed by the poet Roger de Isle.
Deisle,
It,
Roger Deisle,
de Isle. It was sung for the first time by volunteers from Marseilles,
Marseilles,
Marseilles as a march into Paris and so got its name. The Marseillaise is now the national anthem of
Marseilles.
France.
See, Marseilles is a place, but Marseillaise is the song. The
Oh,
Marseillaise is now the national anthem of France. Okay, so Marseilles is a place, and Marseillaise, Laise, right? Marseillaise is the song. So as we know that the king of France, Louis XVI, got into secret negotiations with King of Prussia to bring back their monarchy. Okay, to bring back his power. So he wanted the King of Prussia to attack France, and Louis XVI would come back into power because he wanted to remove the constitutional monarchy and come back into whole power. But before this could happen, the National Assembly voted. Okay, it voted to declare war against to Prussia and Austria. Okay, so war was declared in April 1792 against Prussia and Austria. So thousands of people thronged in the sense they joined. Okay, thronged from the provinces to join army, in the sense they left their people, they left their places and joined the army. They saw this as a war of people against kings and aristocracies. So, what do you mean by aristocracy?
aristocracy is the opposite of democracy. One
Correct. So, yeah,
person
what happens in aristocracy? Can you explain that?
in aristocracy, one person will be there. He will what we say. Uh, he'll take care of everything.
Correct. So, the concentration of powers is in just one man. So, it is opposite of democracy, where one man is given the sole power to run the government. So, that is called as aristocracy. So they didn't want kings and aristocracies all over Europe. That's why people saw this as a war against kings and aristocracies. And among the patriotic songs they sang was the Marseillaise, composed by poet Roget de Isle. It was sung for the first time by the volunteers from Marseilles as they marched into Paris. So the people who joined the army, they were marching from from Marseilles, and they were marching from Marseilles to Paris, and that's why it's got its name, which is Marseillaise, and it's now the national anthem of France. The revolutionary was brought losses and economic difficulties to the people. Okay, so people were obviously facing economic losses and difficulties because of the war. Political clubs. Okay, so in 1791, it gave political rights only to the richer section of society. Okay, so large section of population were convinced that the revolution had to be carried further. Political clubs became an important rallying point for people who wished to discuss government policies and plan their own forms of action. So the most successful of these was that of the Jacobin. So now we come to Jacobins Club. So who was the leader of Jacobin Club? Maximilian Robespierre.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I want you to write it down. Okay, so Maximilian Robespierre was the leader of Jacobin Club. So Jacobin Club was, they included all small shopkeepers, artisans, shoemakers, pastry cooks, watchmakers, printers, as well as servants and daily wage workers. So all small employed people, uh, wage workers, daily wage workers. All these people were, were part of Jacobin Club, and a large group among the Jacobin Club to start, decided to start wearing a long striped trouser similar to those worn by dock workers. This was to set themselves apart from the fashionable sections of society, especially the nobles who wore knee breeches. Yeah, so who was the leader
Robespierre.
of Jacobin Club? Yeah, Maximilian Robespierre.
Full name is required.
What?
Full name is required to remember.
What? I'm not. Yeah, Maximilian Robespierre, full name.
So you can't write just
Max.
Robespierre.
No. They expect you to write the full name. Maximilian Robespierre.
They'll cut marks if I don't write.
Yes, they do.
You did like that?
Yeah, I only wrote Robespierre and marks were cut half marks. Yeah, so in the summer of 1792, so as soon as the National Assembly was coming into power and was exercising, Jacobins planned an insurrection of a large number of Parisians who were angered by the short supplies and high prices of food. So on the morning of 10th August, they stormed the palace of Tuileries and massacred the king's guards and held the king himself as hostage for several hours. Okay, so Tuileries was a palace, another palace like like Versailles. Tuileries was a similar palace. So the king was held as a hostage for several hours. Later, the assembly voted to imprison the royal family. Elections were held from now on. All men of 21 years and above, regardless of wealth, got the right to vote. So, if you can see that even Jacobins played an important role in forming the French Revolution. Okay, so the French Revolution took place. Okay, it is a series of events. You cannot say that French Revolution took on 70. It took place on 1789 on 14 July. That was the event of storming of Bastille. Okay, so the French Revolution was series of events which started from storming of Bastille, and even August 10th, 1792 was also a part of Russia, French Revolution, where the Jacobins brought out right to vote for all men of 21 years and above, regardless of the wealth. Okay, and they got the right to vote regardless of the wealth and the tax they paid. Okay, so it has nothing to do with the tax. So every man above 21 could vote now. The newly elected assembly was called convention. Okay, so the newly elected assembly was called convention. It was a national assembly before, and then the newly elected assembly was called as convention. On 21st September 1792, it abolished the monarchy and declared France as republic. Okay, so the monarchy was totally abolished. Before, they thought that the king must not be removed; he must be given some importance. And later, they did not want king at all because he got into secret negotiations with Russia. So they removed monarchy totally from France and they declared it as republic. Okay, so they declared France as republic. So I want you to write it down. 21st September 1792, France was declared as republic by abolishing monarchy.
Yeah, yeah, I wrote.
Yeah, okay. So Louis XVI was sentenced to death by a court on the charge of treason. So treason in the sense betrayal of one's own country or government. So he did a betray to his own France, right? Because he got into secret negotiations with Prussia, and he wanted Prussia to attack France, and he wanted to save France and become a hero, and wanted to gain back his own power. So he was charged for treason and sentenced to death. So he was executed publicly on 21st January 1793 at a place called De la Concorde, and the Queen, Mary Antoinette, also met with the same fate shortly after. So yeah, so 1793 then starts the Reign of Terror. Okay, this period is called the Reign of Terror, which is very short but brief period. Okay, so 1793 to 1794, which is just 1 year, this is called as the Reign of Terror. Okay, so this is the period of terror. The period from 1793 to 1794 is referred to as the Reign of Terror. Yeah, you can read this.
In this, the period from 1793 to 1794 was known as Reign of Terror. Robespierre,
Yeah.
what we say, he created one machine which what say destroyed
No, that
people.
was not created by Robespierre. Okay, so Robespierre followed a policy of severe control and punishment. Okay, so Robespierre followed policy of severe control and punishment. All those whom he saw as being enemies of the republic, who were ex-nobles and clergies, members of other particular parties, okay, so political parties, even members of his own party who did not agree with his methods were arrested, imprisoned, and then tried by a revolutionary tribunal. If the court found them guilty, they were guillotined. Okay, so guillotine is a device consisting of two poles and a blade, which is, through which a person is beheaded. So his head was beheaded. Okay, so his head was cut. Okay, it was named after Dr. Guillotine, who invented it. Okay, so Guillotine was a person who invented this guillotine device, and that is how a person was charged. Okay, so it was an invention of Dr. Guillotine. Okay, not Robespierre. Robespierre adopted this method. Okay, are you getting?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so Robespierre's government issued laws placing a maximum ceiling on wages and prices. Meat and bread were rationed. Peasants were forced to transport their grain to the cities and sell it at fixed prices, which was set by the government. The use of more expensive white flour was forbidden. All citizens were required to eat the pain day eglite, which is equality bread, a loaf made of whole wheat. Equality was sought to be practiced through forms of speech and address. Instead of the traditional monsieur, sir, and madame for madam, all French men and women were henceforth citoyen, okay, citoyen and citoyenne, which is for citizen. Churches were shut down and their buildings converted into barracks or offices. Okay, so the churches were shut down and their buildings were converted into barracks or offices. So Robespierre pursued his policies so relentlessly that even his supporters began to demand moderation. Finally, he was convicted by a court in July 1794, arrested, and on the next day sent to guillotine. So he was himself guillotined by his strict reforms. So Robespierre was a very person of strict rules and reforms. So he was again, his supporters began to demand moderation against him. So his supporters were also not happy with the strict laws that he brought about, and in July 1794 he was convicted. So Robespierre government, when is the Reign of Terror? I want you to write this, very important. What is Reign of Terror? Reign of Terror is from 1793 to 1794, which was led by Robespierre government. So Maximilian Robespierre was running the government at that time. Okay, which was the new National Assembly, which was convection, right? Yeah,
Right.
convention. So it was his reign of terror, and then he was sent to guillotine because his policies were too strict and he was opposed by his own supporters. So a directory rules France. Okay, the fall of Jacobin government allowed the wealthier middle class to seize power. A new constitution was introduced with the denied to vote non-property sections of society. Okay, so which denied the vote to non-property section of society. So people who were not having properties, they were denied to vote. It provided for two elected legislative councils. These then appointed a directory, an executive made up of 5 members. This was meant as a safeguard against the concentration of power in one man executive as under the Jacobins. However, the directors often clashed with the legislative councils who sought to dismiss them. The political instability of the directory paved way to the rise of a military dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte. So Napoleon Bonaparte was a military dictator. Okay. So he brought about dictatorship. Through all these changes in the form of government, the ideals of freedom or equality before the law and of fraternity remained inspiring ideals that motivated political movements in France and the rest of the Europe during the country. So क्या हुआ, फ्रांस का गवर्नमेंट स्टेबल नहीं था. Okay, the directory was not stable. Okay, it was made up of 5 people, and these 5 people clashed among themselves and with the elected, with the executive, election executive. So, the France government was not stable. So at that time, Napoleon Bonaparte took the advantage of this political instability, and he became a military dictator and brought about dictatorship into France. Okay,
Yeah.
so he became a dictator and he ruled the France. Next, we have, did women have a revolution? So we now read about women. Okay, so from the very beginning, women were active participants in the events which brought about so many important changes in French society. They hoped that their involvement would pressurize the revolutionary government to introduce measures to improve their lives. Most women of the third estate had to work for a living. They worked as seamstresses, laundresses, uh, sold flowers, fruits, vegetables at the market, or were employed as domestic servants in the houses of prosperous people. Most women did not have the access to education or job training. Only daughters of nobles or wealthier members of the third estate could study at a convent. So, convent is a Christian school, after which their families arranged a marriage for them. Working women had also to take care of their families, that is, cook, fetch water, queue up for bread, and look after the children. Their wages were lower than those of men. Okay, and yeah, that is an important drawback which is being run from that time. So, we learn about this in the Russian Revolution as well. So, the wages were lower than that of men. In order to discuss and voice their interests, women started their own political clubs and newspapers. About 60 women's club came up in different French cities. The Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women was the most famous one of them. Okay, so Society of Revolutionary and Republic Women, SRRW. It was a very prominent party. One of their demands was that women should enjoy the same political rights as that of men. Women were disappointed that the Constitution of 1791 reduced them to passive citizens. They demanded the right to vote, to be elected to the assembly, and hold political office. And only then they felt would their interest be presented in the new government. In the early years, the revolutionary government did introduce laws that helped improve the lives of women. Okay, so the revolutionary government did improve the lives of women by introducing some laws. Together with the creation of state schools, schooling was made compulsory for all girls. Their fathers could no longer force them to marriage against their will. Marriage was made into a contract entered into freely and registered under civil law. Okay, so divorce was made legal and could be applied for both men and women. Women would now train for jobs, could become artisans or run small businesses. Okay, so this was during the revolutionary government. So they did provide some support to women. Women's struggle for equal political rights, however, continued. During the reign of terror, the new government issued laws ordering closure of women's club and banning their political activities. So, reign of terror, Maximilian Robespierre. So he asked to stop all the political activities run by women, because his measures was, his policies, his measures were too strict. Many prominent women were arrested and a number of them executed. Women's movements for voting rights and equal wages continued through the next 200 years in many countries of the world. The fight for the vote was carried out through an international suffrage movement during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The example of political activities of French women during the revolutionary was kept alive as an inspiring memory. It was finally in 1946 that women in France got the right to vote. Okay, so it is called as the International Women Suffragette Movement. Okay, which was held in the late 19th and early 20th century. So 1946 was the year when women of France won the right to vote. Yeah, the abolition of slavery. So when we talk about this, right, slavery was an important uh, crisis at that time. So there was slave trade happening in France. So we learn about that. Okay, this is a different part of the French Revolution. How did slavery revolutionize in France? So that is what we learn over here. Okay, so one of the most revolutionary reforms of the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery in French colonies. The colonies in the Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and San Domingo were important suppliers of commodities such as tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. But the reluctance of Europeans to go and work in distant and unfamiliar lands meant a shortage of labor on the plantations. So this was met by a triangular slave trade between Europe, Africa, and America. The slave trade began in 17th century. French merchants sailed from the ports of Bordeaux to Nantes to the African coast, where they brought slaves from local chieftains. So Bordeaux or Nantes to African coast. So Africans were brought as slaves from local chieftains, branded and shackled. The slaves were packed tightly into ship for 3 month long voyage across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. So from the Atlantic they went to the Caribbean. They were then sold to plantation owners. The exploitation of slave labor made it possible to meet the growing demand in European markets for sugar, coffee, and indigo. Port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes owned their economic prosperity to flourish slave trade. So, Bordeaux and Nantes are two very important port cities which flourished only by slave trade. Throughout the 18th century, there were little criticism of slavery in France. The National Assembly held long debates about whether the rights of men should be extended to all French subjects, including those in the colonies. But it did not pass any laws, fearing opposition from businessmen whose income depended on slave trade. Okay, so many businessmen were dependent on slave trade. So they were feared of the opposition that would come from the businessmen. Hence, they did not abolish slave trade. It was finally the convention which in 1794 legislated to free all slaves in the French overseas possessions. So 1794, the newly elected assembly, which was called the convention, it abolished all the slave trade. This, however, turned out to be a short-term measure. 10 years later, when Napoleon reintroduced slavery, okay, the plantation owners understood their freedom as including the right to enslave African Negroes in pursuit of their economic interests. Slavery was finally abolished in French colonies in 1848. So when Napoleon came back, right, it was reintroduced. Okay, slavery was reintroduced. Napoleon reintroduced slavery, the revolution, and everyday life. Can politics change the clothes we wear, the language we speak, or the book they read? So the years following 1789 in France saw many such changes in lives of men, women, and children. The revolutionary governments took it upon themselves to pass laws that would translate the ideals of liberty and equality into everyday practice. One important law that came into effect soon after the storming of the Bastille in the summer of 1789 was the abolition of censorship. Okay, so censorship was an important crisis at that time. So censorship, many people did, they wanted censorship because to show themselves as a good political party and have a good image in the society. So, in the old regime, all written material and cultural activities, books, newspaper, plays, could be published or performed only after they had been approved by the censors of the king. So, the king was trying to make sure that his image was not destroyed and he was in a good image. So, he was having a good image. Now, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed freedom of speech and expression to be natural. Newspapers, pamphlets, books, and printed pictures flooded the towns of France from where they traveled rapidly into the countryside. So, newspaper, pamphlets, books, and all they flourished at that time. They all described and discussed the events of changes taking place in France. Freedom of the press also meant that opposing views of events could be expressed. Each side of the each side sought to convince the others of its position through the medium of print. Plays, songs, and festive processions attracted large number of people. This was one of the way they could grasp and identify with ideas such as liberty or justice that political philosophers wrote about at length in texts which only a handful of educated people could read. So yeah, this is not very important. Again, conclusion. Here we read about Bonaparte. Okay, Napoleon Bonaparte, which is again not very big, but yeah. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself Emperor of France. He set out to conquer neighboring European countries, dispossessing dynasties and creating kingdoms where he placed his family members. Napoleon saw his role as a modernizer of Europe. He introduced many laws such as the protection of private property and a uniform system of weights and measures provided by decimal system. Initially, many saw Napoleon as a liberator who would bring freedom to the people, but soon Napoleonic armies came to be viewed everywhere as an invading force. He finally was defeated at Waterloo in 1815. So the Battle of Waterloo, he was defeated. Okay, which took place in 1815. Many of his measures that carried the revolutionary ideas of liberty and modern laws to other parts of Europe had an impact on people after Napoleon had left. So his laws traveled and his laws, ideals, okay, and laws of liberty, they traveled from place to place, and his ideas, they came into recognition after he had left. So he lost the battle of 1815, but he was not, he was not killed or assassinated in that battle. He just ran away. He fled with his family, and yeah, that's why Napoleon is known as an important personality in this chapter, because he was not found later. He just fled. The ideas of liberty and democratic rights were the most important legacy of the French Revolution. These spread from France to the rest of the Europe during the 19th century, where feudal systems were abolished, colonized peoples reworked the idea of freedom from bondage into their movements to create a sovereign nation state. Tipu Sultan and Rajaram Mohan Roy are two examples of individuals who responded to these ideas coming from revolutionary France. So yeah, French Revolution was not only a revolution which took place in France, but it was a revolution which had an impact on Europe as well as Asia. So if you can see Sultan Tipu Sultan and Rajaram Mohan Roy, they were also quite influenced from the ideas of revolutionary France, and that's how India also got its constitution. And these were all the series of events that led to French Revolution. Yeah, so we are done with this chapter, Shaurya. Have you understood the chapter?
Yeah.
Yeah. So French Revolution, again, see, Napoleon is a very small part of the whole chapter. It's like just half a page out of 24 pages. So Napoleon is playing a very, a small but significant role in this chapter. So what were the measures that he bought? Okay, so that is again an important question. So the measures which were bought by Napoleon was the uniform system of weights and measures, which provided by the decimal system. And he introduced many laws such as protection of private property and uniform system. Yeah, this is very important. Okay, so people saw him as a liberator who would bring freedom for the people. So these were the two laws, or he introduced many laws such as protection of private property and uniform system of weights. So that is how he was trying to modernize Europe. Okay, so he saw himself as a modernizer of Europe. Many of his measures that carried the revolutionary ideas of liberty and modern laws to other parts of Europe had an impact on the people after Napoleon had left. Okay, so his ideas, when they reached other parts of Europe, people were inspired by his revolutionary ideas. Yeah, so that is what is about Napoleon. Okay, so nothing much about Napoleon. So his period was also for 11 years. 1804, he declared, or he crowned himself as the Emperor of France, and then in 1815 he was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. Yeah. So can we end today's class? We have covered almost the full chapter. Yeah, we have covered the full chapter.